All right, hey everyone. Once again, if I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, knowing you, I am Dr. Maury de Govia, one of the co-hosts of the Purple Paradigm. It's a pleasure to be here as moderating these awesome panelists at PopLife40. It has been 40 years since my mother came home and said, I went to the record store today. Guess who released a new album? I said, who? She held up. I was like, and 10-year-old Maury put on her headphones and I put the record on and I heard these flutes. And what I thought at the time, I was like, it sounds like Indian Arabic music. And I listened and I was hypnotized. And that hypnosis has withstood every Prince album. Like I love me some Prince and the Revolution, Prince and the NPG, Prince is Prince. Around the World in a Day still stands as my favorite album. And I really think it's because it was such a fly in the face. It was so different than anything he had released before. So remember, I'm 10 years old at the time. So I had Purple Rain, I had 1999, and that's probably as far back as I went. And that my mother would let me go until I got a little bit older and I was able to get my hands on Dirty Mind and For You, Prince, and Controversy. And what I loved about today's presentation, Robin, who is the other co-host of the Purple Paradigm, we've been texting, and she's like, "We're in Prince school," and I love that everyone brought their own angle around it, and but brought it all together in the synthesis. So what I hope to do within this conversation is basically synthesize how the panelists brought it all together into telling this one amazing story about this time period in 1985. And of course, what it's looked like 40 years later. So with that, I would love to have the panelists just once again introduce yourselves. If you have your Around the World in a Day story that you want to launch with, we can do that. And we're going to get into some questions as they come up. So Jonathan, you want to start us off?
Sure, and hopefully I'm not echoing.
No, you're good.
Woohoo! All right, thank you guys so much for your patience earlier. I apologize again for that. So, excuse me, I am a co-editor of a book called Theology and Prince, which is a scholarly collection. Came out a few years back, and then I did a follow-up Theology and Protest Music and a series on theology and pop culture. I'm also a librarian here in Georgia, and I've been a fan since, as I said, a teen in the 80s. So I've been following him for a long time. Around the World in a Day, of course, I borrowed from my brother's stash, got to know that. I already had Purple Rain, got really into it when Sign of the Times came along. Parade has always been my favorite, actually, undersung. But all of that is sort of my favorite era, of course, as it is for so many.
Thank you, Crystal.
Everyone. It's great to be here. I am still sick, so I'm so sorry. But yeah, again, Crystal, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota. And I appreciated Tammy's comments about the clouds in Minnesota. I think, yes, I look up at them all the time if you all saw those in the chat. So I think that, right, the imagery is what's always drawn me into Around the World in a Day. I for sure will never remember when it first came out, but and going back into it, right, is always the album that I just stare at. I remember when, I don't know if how many of you all got to see it in Chicago when they did like I think it was the immersive experience, Prince immersive experience. But anyway, they had some of the albums and they were just huge on the wall. And like I just wanted to stay there all day because they had the Around the World in a Day um album cover painted on the wall mural. It was just gorgeous. I just loved to look at it. Um, and so so my Around the World in a Day, it's not really a story. It's probably, yeah, it's one of those albums that's just like a whole experience. Um, yeah, and Pop Life and Tambourine are the standouts for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing it in. And of course, audience, please in the chat, we'd love to know what your Around the World in a Day story is, what brings you into this space. But let's get into what we saw just happen with these amazing panelists. So I have my notes. I do have questions, but I also want to go to what I saw. And Jonathan, I loved you talked about the redrawing of the maps, right? Where he brought us from, because he's coming off, this is a season where Prince is coming, he's on tour with Purple Rain, and while he's touring Purple Rain and giving us, giving us that love, he is also creating this around the world in a day art, music, and vision. And you talked about like the physical locations of where he went to, and now it's also bridging into this metaphysical realm, right? Like, open your heart, open your mind. The train is waiting all day, a wonderful trip through our time, and laughter is all you pay. Could you talk a little bit more around how you believe like this bridging of worlds? 'Cause I think this is one of Prince's staples, where he's able to meet us in reality and give us the heart of what's going on, but then he transforms us and he takes us to this other place. And Paisley Park, for example, would be the place where that actually occurs. So as you were crafting and analyzing your portion, what about that bridging of reality versus metaphysical came up for you?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, a lot of things jumped out at me about this when thinking about this song in terms of travel, both imaginary travel and real world travel, right? Like you said. And I started thinking about his previous songs that he had put out and thinking about, not only the specific geographical places he had mentioned, but all the modes of, also the modes of transportation he talked about, from planes to taxi cabs, right? And thinking about how he was thinking in the mode of travel in a variety of senses, but also in this album in particular, he starts talking about actual places. And I realized once I started looking at where he had actually toured so far, I hadn't realized that not only had the Purple Rain tour not even kicked off yet, but he had only performed in 3 other countries before, and 2 of those were Thrown Out and Condition of the Heart, one of my favorite songs. And so I was thinking, he's talking also about some actual settings in some of his earlier songs, like a mansion, a castle. Keeps going back to castles, right? But he's not actually building these kingdoms like he is in some of these songs on this album. The Land of Sin of Plenty, for example. And then, of course, personifying temptation in its own song, too. But I think he's telling us about places he's actually been, but also looking ahead to actually going around the world, which he had not done yet. His European tour wouldn't happen until the Parade tour, because even the Purple Rain tour would only reach the US and Toronto. And that kicked off in November. This song was written around August, September, that time frame. So he had not even really ventured out other than those 3 countries, 2 of which he shouted out. Poor Amsterdam didn't get a shout out for some reason, but London and Paris did.
It didn't resonate the same way. I love it. So thank you for that. So yeah, so even that like he hadn't done the world tour, he hadn't done the world tour yet, but there was also musical influences happening behind the scenes, I think within the revolution. I know that David Coleman, Lisa Coleman's brother, and Jonathan Melvoin, Suzanne and Wendy's brother, they had done work with like belly dancing, and they had done work with in studying of Arabic music and stuff, and they brought that in to the Around the World in a Day piece. And I love the premonition around that, right? So if we fast forward to like the love symbol time, introducing Maite, actually at the end of like the Get Off video, you get introduced to Maite as belly dancer. So there's always this piece where Prince has given us kind of like this premonition of pieces. And Crystal, I want to bring you into the conversation here. You highlight the work with Kendrick as and the challenge of white gaze that Black artists have faced, but Prince too also, and I love the slide that you had where it was like where it happens in Uptown. I thought that was really powerful. I think Prince is always on this premonition piece, and like you can always and going forward with him on the journey, you wouldn't have necessarily known, right? Because hindsight is 2020. Crystal, could you talk a little bit about like that white gaze piece where you feel like, you know what, it actually happened earlier than we actually saw it. And I love the analysis of, the 7th album and the 7th song, because he's finally made it. that I can actually be brave enough and bold enough to let you know what I'm thinking about. Hence Pop Life that you want me to so desperately be a part of. I'm going to stay in Minneapolis anyway. I'm not going to go to LA. I'm not going to live in New York. I'm going to live in LA. I'm going to live in Minnesota. So could you talk a little bit about like how that premonition plays out within that structure of white gaze, and how you think Prince played and how you think Prince handled that?
Yeah, and I think it's and sorry if my voice goes in and out.
You sound great.
Um, right. I sat with that when I was kind of writing it up and analyzing it and thinking across like where have we seen Prince just completely kind of just not do what a superstar does, but then also do things that a superstar does. But anyhow, but when he doesn't do it, like you said, not moving out to LA, permanently or anything like that. I think it's just something that he was because he had a clear vision, right? And I think that's why I was trying to bring in this idea of, right, him being in these liminal spaces is like, he's like, not, he doesn't present to us as like ever being in the moment he's in, right? I always see when I'm listening to his lyrics, um, right, he's somewhere else. He's not where he is, right? Whether it's the music taking you back to some other time or it's his lyrics, he's alluding to something else, and then kind of the vision for where he's going. And he has I think throughout his career, he had a very clear vision. And so that's kind of why I even wanted to point out, right, that he's doing all the work on the album because he's trying to keep this vision very clear. And it is a very interesting time in history where he's coming, right? Because he has so many stories of people who just, they didn't make it for lots of reasons. And it's not self-destruction, right? It's how society views them, but the pressures they put on them, the limitations they put on them. And I think Prince is learning from that and looking at that and trying to keep it really tight. And also just living in Minnesota. There's so many layers to this. So I hope it's gonna feel a little circular. But like there's something very homey about Minnesota, and they like that is what I'm learning. And so that sense I think is also kind of weighing down on him, and not weighing in a bad way. It's just kind of like this sensibility. So it's like I can be great. Everything about me is already great. I don't need, yes, I know I'm going to need to appeal to these audiences. And, you can go into lots of folks' work now that's going through the Minneapolis Sound to understand, right, that history of performing for others at the same time. So, right, he's clearly seeing all of these things. And I think he's just staying in that space of like, that's why I brought up Lady Cab Driver. He's nowhere other people, who have come before him have been, right? But he knows he's on this new path. And so how do I keep my vision clear? And how do I keep my artistry clear? And what do I need to surround myself with to be able to figure those things out? And he is very much so, like I said, being in a small community of Black folks in Minnesota, you're constantly living under that gaze. And so, if you're going to make it, you have to resist that. And so I think that's what even when he's in his fictional kind of worlds, it shows up as we saw in Uptown. I would say, again, on that album cover, this whole idea of you're kind of just playing with race in some ways, or mixing up bodies or people and doing all these abstractions, is because he's already trying to find another way out because he knows he'll get boxed in again.
And that's been a constant theme. And Jonathan, you mentioned about the Du Bois and the double consciousness aspect that, Black artists have had to, Black people, Black culture actually has had to navigate throughout. And I saw there was a comment in the chat also around this, that there is this, who am I in the here and now? And then I'm projecting also beyond this piece. And to your point, Crystal, about breaking free from this box. But then there's also these themes of, and this happens throughout Prince's work, around isolation and loneliness. I think about, anesthesia. Have you ever been so lonely that you felt like you were the only one in this world, right? Around the world in a day. Loneliness already knows you. There is, like it's already there with you. So I'm curious around, like, what are your thoughts around how he navigates through this alienation, through this isolation? Is it the music that actually creates the portal for me to play with time? And I could play with time, I could play with space, or is it something about vision because, you know, I loved when Edgar pretty much laid out for the different, like the 15 different pieces of imagery that he wanted on the album. So this is also, he always came across as just like, I'm so creative and I'm so, you know, out there and I'm always seeing, but he was also very intentional, right? The vision wasn't just like, let me throw it to the wall and see what sticks. It was like, let me craft this out. So what's on your mind around how he plays with that time and space to, because by the time we got it, he was already on, he was on to the next thing, right? He was already at parade when we got, he was in Under the Cherry and the Moon creation by the time we got Around the World in a Day, right? And I loved how Karen's presentation showed like the transition of the clothing from Purple Rain through Around the World in a Day, through Parade, because you see the similarities, but somehow it fits within the concept. So what's on your mind around how Prince navigates time and space?
Crystal, you can add your thoughts if you want to, but what struck me when I was looking at all this too was this tension between loneliness and community that he talks about in the title song, right? And also looking at his own life and work. And as you read through Dwayne Tudall's wonderful books, you get this sense of how the studio was sort of this cocoon of safety for Prince for much of his life. And even though he built this community around his music, he had collaborators come in and out of the studio, of course, at all hours of the day and night. But he also, even with his world tours that happened later on, he had this sense of being about himself and maybe a small circle around him. And the circle would change. And as we know, he had problems with abandonment, right? He would leave people before they left him. That was his fear, right? We've heard that from his collaborators before. And so I think we're seeing that come up in some of these lyrics in this album. Not only is he yearning to travel the world himself, as he talks about here, but he's also yearning for more sense of community than he will ever let himself really genuinely feel. And he remains a lonely person, even with all his relationships that he has.
Well said. Crystal, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would say, yes, I think for sure there's I should have said that too, condition of the heart. I hope someone's going to talk about love it, love, love, love.
That. Love that. That's
But
like a prelude. That's what to me. It's a prelude to like a solo. That's what it reminds me of. But I won't get distracted. Go ahead. Say what you had to say.
now I will speak
I'll
to
go down a whole different tunnel. Go down. Go ahead.
not loneliness in the physical sense, because I think that is very much so prevalent throughout Prince's work. But I think it's again this vision, right? If you are like in another, space and time, and you are living that out and you already see it and that's where you are. You're not in this present physical space. I think that alone is loneliness. This is kind of why I was kind of likening to this tenure process, which I'm going through right now, right? Like, right, you're already like, you have to plan these things out. You're writing for audiences, like the things you're writing now, it takes forever for it to actually flow through because you're dealing with, right, review, Prince is dealing with, right, people, they're gonna, I give you the album now, you want to sell it, you want to promote it, you want to do all these things, but like Celia is saying, kind of this has been talked about when Prince is living in these multiple universes and these parallel timelines, and he has to, because right, he has this output, he has this vision, and I do think he was really honestly trying to create a better world. And if it couldn't be like on a bigger scale, it was at least going to be in his space. And so to be a visionary and that like that, and people aren't there yet, I think that does produce a type of loneliness, but you can't give it up, right? Because this is kind of like your spiritual calling. This is kind of like why you are here. And it is waiting for everybody else to catch up. Now, I'm not saying I am that as brilliant as that to actually know exactly what that feels like. It's kind of the things, I aspire to when you're doing your work, whatever work you're doing, right? This is going to be able to help someone, but right, you can't think about the here and now. You always are trying to put something out into the future. And I think that this is truly what it would mean to be a visionary and to live out that vision. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I think that for me, that's the loneliness that I am kind of tapping into to try to understand, well, what is he resisting? What is he pushing? It's not just like, yes, this physical form, this way society is that if we're going to make a new world, and I think we all need to be thinking about this now, right? If we're going to create something new and better than what we had before and respond to things that you don't like now, you have to live in a space that is not now. You have to think through that, and that's going to be lonely because everything that's happening around you right now is not right. It's not part of that vision, right? Like, and you can't just respond to what is here. It's what is actually true, what actually humans need. What do we need to create? What do we need to make something better? And a lot of times you're getting a lot of things that are not aligned to that. And I think that's a lonely place to be in if you stay in the here and now. And I think that for me, when I hear Prince, a lot of times that's what I'm hearing.
I love that. And I think that that is a true experience if you're looking to be innovative. And because you can't necessarily, while the past supports us in a Sankofa type of way, we can look back and know where we are today because of those who came before us. You really do want to look ahead and move forward. But with that, what you offered, Crystal and Jonathan, for this question, there's a question in the chat, in the Q&A box around this idea, right? So Love Sexy 71 asks, if Purple Rain was not the blockbuster release and phenomenon that it indeed was, do you believe that Prince would have still released Around the World in a Day as the next LP released? Like, could Around the World in a Day have followed 1999?
It's a great question. And, we should also remember that he didn't plan to do Around the World in a Day as an album follow-up to Purple Rain initially. He had a different album in mind, as we read in Dwayne's book. He was looking at doing an album called Paisley Park, based around an unrelated instrumental called Paisley Park he'd already composed. And he already had a couple of songs, I believe they were Raspberry Beret, one of the others, I'm not sure which one. Those were already ready to go before Around the World in a Day. The song came along, and then he's like, yeah, I want to do something with the song, but not the next album. Then he changed his mind. He's like, no, let's do it. Let's build it around this song. And that became his theme. He did want something that was sort of the anti-Purple Rain, as we have read, because he wanted to subvert everyone's expectations. That was always his project, right? Subverting people's expectations every chance he got. And so he wanted to change people's minds about what he and his music were about. And that's why he made such a 360 with this album here, or 180, as you will.
Definitely 180. Crystal?
Yeah, I think if Purple Rain didn't hit like it hit, honestly, I think he would have tried for the thing to be, a Purple Rain. And that might be unpopular, I don't know. But I think he would have tried for that because, and I only say that with the insight of, having that the money that Purple Rain raked in, the notoriety that it allowed, right? I do think that that's part of how Prince had a lot of freedoms to do a lot of other things. I think from a recording artist perspective, I think he would have reached for, what would be the next Purple Rain. I actually think he would have done that. And so I don't think this departure into, something that looks completely different for what everybody else would have been expecting. But I don't know that Prince, did he ever do anything that people were expecting? I think right? Like he gave us things we didn't know we needed and things we didn't know we wanted. So, I think he would have just tried to wait for us to catch up again.
Yeah, and then I think that's the brilliance of Prince, right? There's this imagination in the face of resistance. Because for me, I remember 10-year-old me remembers being like, this sounds nothing like he's done before. And then I was grasped by it and held by it to this day, right? And within that resistance conversation, he's often, Prince is never really positioned as like a socio-political type of artist. But there have been times where he has truly taken a stand for what he believes and how it shows up. And I loved, Crystal, your analogy, your comparison between him and Kendrick. And you chose an image where, Kendrick's dancers were in the red, white, and blue. And I couldn't help but think as you were talking about America, aristocrats on a mountain climb, making money and losing time, right? I couldn't help but think about how that played out 40 years ago under Reaganomics and how it's playing out now in a Trump era presidency, and what it looks like to keep on pushing forward within that. And Paisley Park, which Jonathan just talked about, is as the place where those who are in the resistance get to go live and play, right? So let's take that 40-year journey to where we are today, a little bit around how Prince shows up. And for those of us who have had the chance to go to Paisley Park or, prior to his passing and even today, how do you see Paisley Park playing into that resistance? Is it living to the dream that he once sang about on Around the World in a Day? Or are you seeing things be influenced and shifting it around? Because there's again this premonition that he gives us in 85, and here we are, we get to go to Celebration of Year going in June. What's on your mind about that?
Crystal, have you been to Paisley Park?
I have.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
so the question is it living up to kind of like Prince's?
Yeah, like, is Paisley Park the resistance that you think Prince wanted it to be? Or is am I making this up as I'm talking right now? I think so true story. Prior to Anesthesia, Paisley Park was at one point my favorite Prince song. And
Yeah.
I loved it because of the liberation that it offered, right? Like Prince for me is the artist who quirky, odd, nerdy black girls got to like look up to and be a part of, and it made sense, right? And for those of us who grew up listening to Prince as children, you probably were heckled and made fun of. It wasn't like everybody's like, oh, he's a genius today. But in 1985, you were made fun of and called names. Like you were standing out if you chose to love Prince as a kid. Right. I just got whoever gave me a heart, thumbs up, listen. Right. So I remember hearing Paisley Park, and it's the second track on the album. And as resistance came up in today's conversation, and actually it was with you, Crystal, that I wrote it down, that Paisley Park was Prince's resistance. Most
Yeah.
people don't make the money they make after Purple Rain and go open up a recording studio. Most people don't do that, right? Like Prince said, I'm going to go create this recording studio where not only will I be able to record, I can make videos. It could be a hub of creation for artists and himself, right? That is unusual. So that's resistance in itself, because he could have said, I'm going to LA, I'm going to go to Beverly Hills, I'm going to get my house in California. He didn't choose that. So he's always in this resistance around what you expect me to do, and then I'm going to take you on a journey musically that looks different. So I'm just curious around, here we are 40 years later, and your thoughts around how has that resistance played out? Do you see Paisley Park within that, in that context? I know that there are other political things around it, but as a visitor, as a lover of Prince, who if you visited,
Yeah.
what does it look like for you?
Yeah, I would like to see more innovative thought from them. And again, no one is Prince. Nobody will ever be Prince. And I think, right, that's again another reason why we show up today, because it's just right. It's a very complex person, artist. And so I don't think they are as innovative. And even to that point, right? It's when you do things, but you have a clear idea of why you're doing them, even if it's not clear to other folks. I don't think when I arrive at an event from Paisley that I was like, oh, this is why, we had to wait or something like this happened. That never happens. It's just, it really is, something else that's going on, but it's not innovation. It's not trying to live out kind of, in my opinion, right, some of the principles that Prince live by or tried to, right, with his artistry, even if it was kind of like, I don't, it's Prince's way of doing things where, for example, there's someone you're like, oh, that's the singer, right? But somehow when Prince pulls that person in, you kind of say like, oh, that works. But when they invite someone or do something, it's like, oh, that's the singer. Oh, that's what we're doing, right? It doesn't ever kind of work out. And I'm gonna stop because, but I don't think it's rising to the level of Prince's innovation and vision and sitting in that. And maybe there's a lot of other reasons why they can't just kind of sit in the artistry and try to pull out, like, what are some of these things that Prince, what makes Prince really just a singular artist, and how do we keep that going? I need that to happen because there, and I meant it when I said in my presentation, even around, right, the way Prince is resisting the white gaze or white supremacy, whatever it is, you know, even if it's not, I mean, everything has to do whatever in this country, but anyway, right, whatever it is, like, how did Prince do things? Sit down, map that out. What is this vision? And actually live that out. So that is part of his legacy, and people learn from that. Because you're right, he's one of the only artists who is able to completely have a space of his own to create in the ways that he wanted to create.
And I
And
think
that,
maybe that's the demand of the Prince fam,
yeah.
right? And if not, as Paisley Park as its own building, you know, some comments in the chat here. Tammy put that it was like it's like our own Black Disneyland, you know. It's and then Lee put it's just Graceland, but for Prince now, really. So like, yeah, there's this corporate business angle because it's got to keep going, right? The creativity hub of it, though, not so much. But I think there is a demand on the Prince family to really think about how they are creating within their own spaces, and what are they bringing forth within those spaces to help the next show up, right? So that we're not necessarily in repetitive land, but we actually can be bold and brave enough after I've hit my highest that I'm going to go completely left and be great within that space and keep riding my own trajectory as I see fit. I think that those are the Prince lessons that I think is, you know, that shouldn't be lost on us. And I think that he gave us to keep carrying the legacy forward. Jonathan, any thoughts there, whether you have visited Paisley or not, just in terms of the song and the music itself and where we are today?
Yeah, and also I'm thinking about to the style of music, you know, we talk about in terms of psychedelic as an album. And I think also around the same time, he alluded to that he also had a time album in his pocket. It was going to be a psychedelic time album, which is very cryptic. I'd love to know more about this psychedelic time album he had in mind. But maybe this became his outlet for the psychedelic music of the time. He said, no, I'll make it my own instead, right? Um, you know, fast forwarding into the future, I think looking at what has happened to his legacy musically in terms of the vault, etc. It's so tragic because, of course, not leaving a will behind. His greatest fear, you know, that all his legacy would be in the hands of bankers and lawyers actually came true, right? So now we get to deal with whatever is going on politically with the estate. We see what comes out, what's released. Some of it's great, some of it's awesome, some of it's kind of a repeat of what we've already heard. So I know we'd all love to hear new stuff. We all love discovering Rearrange, which is one of my favorite undiscovered jams that came out of the
I
vault.
love it too.
Yeah, I love
Right?
that. I love
But
that.
I think there are more discoveries to be made there. I'd love for some of that to come to light, especially the Black is the New Black album, which I don't know if that was ever finished or not, but I know he was working on it when he passed.
Yeah, so there's gonna be more to come. You know, Prince is never gonna leave us like
Yeah,
that. There's always gonna be
right.
more to come. The last piece I want to talk about is a reoccurring Prince theme. And Edgar said it beautifully in his presentation that while, you know, purgatory is happening, so we go back to the, you know, the image of the ladder in the center, and there's the naked woman body behind. So there's always this this dynamic with Prince of purgatory while temptation looms, right? And it's you know, temptation strategically placed as the last track. And you know, for those of us who've heard it, it's you know, going through, you know, temptation, you know, working my body, right? Animal lust. And then this conversation with God that ends it. You know, and I think about my mom, God rest her soul. We go to Love Sexy, and she's like, she's from Trinidad. She's like, he's really an amazing artist, you know. But oh gosh, this God and sex thing is really present all the time. I don't know about mixing it up like that, but okay, it was a really great show. You know, so purgatory and temptation, right? So it's on the art and the cover of the album, and then it's on in the music. What comes up for you around in regards to around the world in a day? And I'm trying to think like on the top of my head, has Prince given us, I guess, you know, controversy, he does the Lord's Prayer. But this it to me it's very explicit within it, it like anchors the album, it covers the album, it's throughout the journey, tambourine, because he wasn't talking about the percussion instrument, the tambourine, you know, and leading us into temptation. how do you feel about how Prince plays with this, spiritual versus purgatory versus God's intervention in his music and in this piece of work in particular?
Crystal, would you like to take that?
I'll try. So, I mean, so if I go on, I think there are multiple, because it's Prince, right? It's just multiple meanings, multiple layers. And even when I got to a certain point in my analysis, I did sit there with like, how much did Prince kind of want to give in to like pop star life? Um, and so if I make it and right, and he's not the one holding the ladder, but then again, I'm still back at trying to interpret who is who and how other people are coming into the images of other folks, right? So to me, he kind of looks like who I think is like the Fink character in the doctor suit and the gray hair and holding the ladder. And I don't think he kind of because what he says at the end of it, right? And off I go. I think he did need to like pull himself together to kind of figure out, yes, when I was just talking about he had a clear vision and all of that, I think he did have to like figure out like I could go off and just be fleshly and give into all the things of being a pop star and move through this. And then when I put that quote up from his early script of or his early narrative of Purple Rain, but he also also I think he truly believes he has messages to put out in the world, and that would cloud pun intended, right? The vision. And so I really do think that he was wrestling with, can I just keep going in this pop star life? And I'm pretty sure there are several people, from his camp would say he was completely living kind of in a pop star life. But still, I think ultimately, right, he is trying to answer to a higher calling. And so I think that is absolutely kind of the tension we're seeing. And why, right, temptation shows up or sex or God. And I really just think it's like, right, fleshly or human, this physical or spiritual form. And he's kind of wrestling with that. And he's in this in-between space where this is right here, right now. He could grab it. But what does that mean long term for here and also, right, as a spiritual being?
Yeah, that's that double consciousness playing out too.
Yeah.
I think temptation really is who he is, like the hot animal lust. It's not the way, man. Like God speaking. That dynamic is a part of how he plays, like he of himself, the two, the Gemini, the two sides play out against each other, and then of course aiming for the higher. Jonathan, I just wanted to give you a chance. We have like 2 minutes left if you wanted to
Sure.
chime in on this one.
Yeah, just pointing out briefly here that, growing up as a Seventh-day Adventist, as he did, without the traditional belief in heaven or hell, it's interesting that he began to focus on things like this in albums later on, especially in Love Sets, but with hints of it here in Temptation, as you said, too. He's got the idea of a vengeful God, but also looking at punishment from this God and actually looking like he's about to be thrown into hell for this lust. So I think it's something he's beginning to think more about, but it's not what he was raised with, except when he was visiting perhaps the Baptist churches growing up.
Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for those in the chat. The chat is lighting up. Yes. And yeah, the ladder and then temptation. That's Prince Rogers Nelson in a nutshell. Thank you so much for joining in. D'Angela, we are complete with this panel. Jonathan and Crystal, Karen and Edgar, thank you so much for your contribution to this part of the conversation. I am looking forward to the rest of this day. Thank you, D'Angela.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Dr. Maury, for the amazing moderation. And you also look so stunning.
Thank you. This is a rich auntie. Listen.
And thank you, Crystal, for your amazing presentation. And you look awesome too. And I really am grateful that you're here, even though you're sick. So that's dedication and commitment. Really appreciate you. And thank you so much, Jonathan, for being here and for doing the tech check. And that's just how things go. It's just... And so, all right, we need to take a break. So we only have roughly 30 minutes before we get to our next session, which is an integrated session of What Did Prince Do This Week that is streaming here on Zoom events. We normally do this weekly on YouTube. We will not be on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, we won't be there. We will be here at Zoom events. And we will have the one and only Dwayne Tudall with us because we are reading the second book in Dwayne's Studio Sessions book. We're reading it week by week. We took 2 years to read the first book, and this is another 2 years for the second book. So this is what we're going to be talking about. We're actually going to be talking about the last show of the Purple Rain Tour. I'm going to see who my real peeps are. What was the last show of the Purple Rain Tour? What city was it? In the chat. Let's see who knows. Theo, look at Theo. Theo did his reading. So that's what I'm talking about. Theo is one of our What Did Prince Do This Week regulars. So they have been reading this book. I know that for a fact. So let's take a break, move your body, get some coffee, get your snacks. And we are going to be back for noon. Hopefully, Celie, you will join us. Kim, who's our timekeeper in the chat, please keep us, because we only have an hour for this. So thank you so much. All right. Goodbye, everyone.